The sound of a baby crying in his barn at 3 in the morning was the last thing Jake Yates expected to hear when he stumbled out of his ranch house in nothing but his long johns and boots, shotgun in hand, ready to face down whatever coyote or thief had decided to disturb his sleep on this cold Kansas night in March of 1873. The wind howled across the plains outside Hays City, cutting through the gaps in the barn walls with a bitter edge that made Jake's breath fog in the lamplight as he raised it high, scanning the lower level of the barn. His horses shifted nervously in their stalls, but nothing seemed amiss down here. Then he heard it again, clearer now, the unmistakable wail of an infant coming from the hayloft above. Jake's heart hammered as he climbed the ladder with one hand, the lamp hooked over his elbow, shotgun slung across his back. He had lived alone on this ranch for 3 years now, ever since his father died and left him the property at age 23. In all that time, nothing stranger than a barn owl had taken up residence in his loft. What he found at the top made him freeze completely. A young woman lay curled in the hay, her dark hair tangled with bits of straw, her dress torn and dirty, her face pale as moonlight. In her arms, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, a baby squirmed and cried, its little fists waving in the air. The woman's eyes were closed, and for a terrifying moment, Jake thought she might be dead, but then he saw her chest rise and fall in shallow breaths. He set the lamp down carefully and approached, his anger at the intrusion melting into concern. Up close, he could see she was young, probably not more than 20, with delicate features and dark circles under her eyes that spoke of exhaustion beyond anything he had ever known. The baby could not have been more than a few months old, tiny and red-faced with crying. Jake reached out and gently touched the woman's shoulder. Her eyes flew open instantly, wide with terror, and she scrambled backward, clutching the baby to her chest so tightly the infant's cries intensified. "Please," she gasped, her voice hoarse and desperate. "Please don't hurt us. I will leave. I just needed somewhere warm for the night. Please." Jake held up both hands, showing he meant no harm. "Easy now. I am not going to hurt you. You are freezing and that baby needs tending to." She stared at him with eyes the color of honey, assessing, trying to determine if he was telling the truth. Her whole body trembled, whether from cold or fear he could not tell. Probably both. "What is your name?" Jake asked softly, the way he might approach a spooked horse. "Penelope," she whispered. "Penelope Lane. This is my daughter, Rosemary." "Well, Miss Lane, I am Jake Yates, and this is my barn. You picked a cold night to sleep in a hayloft. When did you last eat?" Penelope's eyes filled with tears and she looked away, ashamed. "Yesterday morning. Maybe the morning before. I do not remember any more." Jake's chest tightened with something he had not felt in a long time. Protectiveness, maybe, or just basic human decency that he hoped still existed out here on the frontier. "Can you walk?" she nodded hesitantly. "Then come on down to the house. I will get you both fed and warm and we can figure out what to do in the morning." "I have no money," Penelope said quickly. "I cannot pay you." "Did I ask for money?" Jake extended his hand to help her up. "Come on now, that baby is hungry, I can tell." Penelope looked at his offered hand for a long moment before she took it. Her fingers were ice cold, and Jake could feel how thin she had become beneath the layers of her tattered dress. She stood unsteadily, still clutching Rosemary, and Jake grabbed the lamp to light their way down. The walk to the house was short, but Penelope stumbled twice, her strength clearly depleted. By the time they reached the porch, Jake had made a decision he hoped he would not regret. He pushed open the door to the small ranch house and ushered her inside, where the embers in the fireplace still glowed faintly. "Sit there," he said, pointing to the chair closest to the hearth. He immediately set about building up the fire, adding logs until flames crackled and danced, throwing blessed heat into the room. Penelope sank into the chair with a soft sob of relief, and little Rosemary's cries quieted to whimpers. Jake lit more lamps and got his first good look at his unexpected guests. Penelope's dress had once been a respectable gray cotton, but it was now stained and torn in several places. Her boots were worn through at the soles. The baby's blanket was thin and inadequate for a Kansas winter, even as it turned toward spring. "Are you nursing her?" Jake asked, then felt his face heat at the indelicate question. But Penelope just nodded, looking down at Rosemary with such tenderness that Jake felt something shift in his chest. "Yes, but I have not eaten enough to make much milk. She has been so hungry." "Right." Jake moved to his small kitchen area and began pulling out supplies. Bread, butter, cold ham from yesterday's dinner, a jar of preserves his neighbor Mrs. Henderson had given him last fall. He poured milk into a pot and set it on the stove to warm, then arranged everything on a plate and brought it to Penelope. Her eyes went wide at the sight of food, and her hand trembled as she reached for the bread. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Eat slow," Jake warned. "You will make yourself sick otherwise." She nodded and took small bites, though he could see it took all her self-control not to devour everything at once. Jake poured the warm milk into a mug and handed it to her, then retreated to give her some privacy while she ate and nursed the baby. He stood by the window, looking out at the dark expanse of his land, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A woman and a baby, appearing out of nowhere in the middle of the night. She was clearly running from something or someone. The question was what, and how much trouble was she bringing to his door? But when he turned and saw her there, hunched over her child, eating like she had not seen food in days, he found he did not much care about the trouble. Whatever her story, she needed help, and he was not the kind of man to turn away someone in need. After Penelope had eaten and the baby had nursed, Jake showed them to his bedroom. "You take the bed. I will sleep out here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Penelope protested weakly. "You can and you will. That baby needs proper rest, and so do you." Jake pulled out some clean blankets from the chest at the foot of the bed. "There is a basin and pitcher of water if you want to wash up. I will get you something clean to wear." He rummaged through his clothes and found an old shirt that would be big enough to serve as a nightdress for her. When he turned around, Penelope was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. "Miss Lane, no one has been kind to me in so long," she whispered. "I do not know what to say." Jake set the shirt on the bed. "You do not have to say anything. Just rest. We will talk in the morning." She nodded, clutching Rosemary close. Jake left the room and closed the door behind him, then stood in the main room of his house wondering what exactly he had gotten himself into. He made himself a bed on the floor near the fire using blankets and his saddle as a pillow, but sleep did not come easily. His mind kept drifting to the woman in his bedroom, to the fear in her eyes, to the way she held that baby like it was the only good thing left in her world. He had seen desperate people before out here on the frontier, but something about Penelope Lane touched something deep inside him that he thought had died when his father passed. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Jake rose and started a pot of coffee. He was frying eggs and bacon when he heard the bedroom door open. Penelope emerged, still wearing her dirty dress, carrying Rosemary. The baby was awake but quiet, her big eyes looking around with infant curiosity. "Morning," Jake said, trying to sound casual. "Coffee, please." Penelope sat down at the small table, and Jake noticed she moved less stiffly than she had last night. Food and rest had helped, though she still looked exhausted. He poured her a cup and set it in front of her, then served up the eggs and bacon on 2 plates. They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Jake did not push. When Penelope was ready to talk, she would talk. Finally, she set down her fork and looked at him directly. "I suppose you want to know my story. Only if you want to tell it." Penelope took a deep breath. "I was married. My husband, Thomas, he seemed like a good man when we met in Missouri 2 years ago. My parents had died of fever the winter before, and I had no other family. Thomas offered security, a home. I thought I was lucky." Her voice went flat. "I was wrong." Jake kept his expression neutral, but his hands tightened on his coffee cup. "He had a temper," Penelope continued quietly, "and he drank. The more he drank, the worse the temper got. When I found out I was carrying Rosemary, I thought maybe it would change things, but it only made him angrier. He said he did not want children, did not want the expense." She paused to take a sip of coffee, her hands shaking slightly. "3 months ago, after Rosemary was born, it got so bad I feared for our lives. One night when he passed out drunk, I took what little money I had hidden and I ran. I have been traveling ever since, trying to get far enough away that he could not find us." "Why Hayes City?" Jake asked. "I had no particular destination. I just kept moving west. My money ran out 2 weeks ago in Salina. I have been walking since then, taking odd jobs when I could find them, sleeping wherever I could. Last night I saw your barn and I was so tired. I am sorry, I should not have trespassed." "Did your husband follow you?" Penelope's face went pale. "I do not know. I have been looking over my shoulder the whole way, but I have not seen him. Maybe he does not care enough to come after us. Maybe he is glad we are gone." Jake doubted that. Men like her husband, men who needed to control and hurt, they did not take kindly to their property running away. And that was how men like that saw their wives, as property. It made Jake's blood boil. "You are safe here," he said firmly. "No one is going to hurt you or your baby." Penelope's eyes filled with tears again. "Mr. Yates, you have already done so much. I cannot ask you for more. I will rest today, and then Rosemary and I will move on." "Move on to where? You have no money, no supplies, and winter is barely over. You would both freeze or starve before you made it to the next town. Then what do you suggest?" Penelope's voice held a note of desperation. "I will not be a burden to you." Jake leaned back in his chair, thinking. An idea had been forming in his mind since last night, but he had not quite worked out all the angles. Now, looking at this young woman and her baby, both of them so clearly in need, the idea solidified into something concrete. "I have a proposition," he said slowly. "I need help around here. The ranch is small, but it is more than one person can manage alone. Cooking, cleaning, mending, tending the garden come spring. There is plenty of work if you are willing." Penelope stared at him. "You are offering me a job, room and board, plus a small wage. Nothing fancy, but enough to save up some money for when you decide what you want to do next. You and Rosemary would have a roof over your heads, food to eat, and safety. Why would you do this for a stranger?" Jake met her eyes steadily. "Because it is the right thing to do. Because I have the means to help and you need help. Because that baby deserves a chance at life, and so do you." He paused. "And because I could use the company if I am being honest. It gets lonely out here." Penelope was quiet for a long moment, studying him. Jake held still, letting her look her fill. He knew what she would see. A man in his middle 20s, tall and lean from hard work, with dark hair and gray eyes and a face that had been weathered by sun and wind. He was not much to look at, but he was honest and hardworking, and right now that was what mattered. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked finally. "You do not," Jake said simply. "But you trusted me enough to come into the house last night. Trust me a little further. If you do not like the arrangement, you can leave whenever you want. I will not stop you." Penelope looked down at Rosemary, who had fallen asleep in her arms. When she looked back up at Jake, there was something new in her eyes. Hope, maybe, or just the faintest hint of it. "All right," she said softly. "We will stay. And thank you, Mr. Yates. I will work hard, I promise." "Jake," he corrected. "If we are going to be living under the same roof, might as well use first names. And I believe you. Now, first order of business is getting you some proper clothes. I will ride into Hayes City this morning and pick up some things. You make a list of what you and the baby need." "Jake, I told you I have no money. And I told you there is a wage. Consider this an advance." He stood and started clearing the breakfast dishes. "You just rest today. Get your strength back. Tomorrow we will start fresh." The ride into Hayes City took about 45 minutes, and Jake used the time to think through what he was doing. Taking in a married woman, even one running from a bad situation, was risky. People would talk. They would make assumptions. But Jake had never much cared what people thought, and he was not about to start now. Hayes City was bustling despite the early hour, a rough town that had grown up around the railroad and the cattle trade. Jake hitched his horse outside the general store and went in, pulling out the list Penelope had written in careful script. She had asked for only the bare necessities: a dress, undergarments, a warmer blanket for Rosemary, some cloth diapers, a bar of soap. Jake added to the list on his own: a second dress, a warm shawl, good sturdy boots, a proper wool blanket for the baby, and some fabric that Penelope could make into more clothes later. He also picked up extra supplies for the house: flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans, salt pork, and a few luxuries like honey and dried fruit. The storekeeper, Mr. Patterson, raised his eyebrows at the quantity and variety of goods. "Stocking up, Jake. Got some help at the ranch now," Jake said shortly, not offering more information. "That right?" Mr. Patterson's curiosity was evident, but Jake just paid for his purchases and loaded everything into his saddlebags and the extra burlap sacks he had brought. He was walking back to his horse when he heard his name called. Turning, he saw Doc Morrison crossing the street toward him. The doctor was in his 50s, a good man who had patched Jake up more than once over the years. "Jake, good to see you. How is everything out at your place?" "Good, Doc. Actually, I am glad I ran into you. I was wondering if you might come by sometime soon. I have someone staying with me, a young woman with a baby. They have been through a rough time and I want to make sure they are healthy." Doc Morrison's expression grew serious. "Of course, I can come by tomorrow afternoon if that suits." "That would be fine. Thank you, Doc." "This woman, she is not in any trouble, is she?" Jake considered how to answer. "She is running from a bad marriage. She and her baby needed help. I offered them a place to stay." The doctor nodded slowly. "I see. Well, you are doing a good thing, Jake. Not many men would. I will see you tomorrow." Jake rode back to the ranch feeling satisfied with his morning's work. When he arrived, he found Penelope had not just rested as he had told her to. She had cleaned the entire house, swept the floors, washed the dishes, and even started a stew on the stove with what ingredients she had found in his pantry. "I told you to rest," Jake said, but there was no heat in his voice. Penelope looked up from where she was folding clean laundry, Rosemary asleep in a makeshift cradle she had fashioned from a crate and some blankets. "I needed to do something useful. I have been taking charity for weeks. It feels good to work." Jake set down his parcels and started unpacking. When Penelope saw the quantity of things he had bought, her face went pale. "Jake, this is too much. I can never repay you for all of this." "Then do not think of it as repayment. Think of it as an investment in my ranch. I need someone healthy and strong to help me run this place, and you cannot be either of those things without proper clothes and food." He pulled out the fabric and set it on the table. "I did not know what colors you liked, so I just got some plain cotton. You can make it into whatever you need." Penelope's fingers touched the fabric reverently, and Jake saw her blink back tears. "Thank you," she whispered, Over the next few days, they settled into a routine. Jake rose before dawn to tend to the horses and cattle, while Penelope made breakfast. After eating, Jake would go about his work around the ranch while Penelope tended to the house and Rosemary. They would meet for lunch, then return to their respective tasks until supper. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and slowly, Penelope began to relax. She laughed at Jake's stories about growing up on the ranch, about his father's stubborn refusal to admit when he was wrong, about the time Jake had tried to break a wild Mustang and ended up in the water trough. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her mother's garden and her father's bookshop, about how she had loved to read before life became too hard for such luxuries. Doc Morrison came as promised and examined both Penelope and Rosemary. He pronounced them both malnourished and exhausted but otherwise healthy. "Keep feeding them well and they will bounce back," he told Jake privately. "You are doing good work here." Word had gotten around town about Jake's houseguest, and one Sunday morning they had a visit from Reverend Parker and his wife, a formidable woman named Agnes who ran the church ladies' auxiliary with an iron fist. Jake saw them coming up the road and warned Penelope, who immediately went pale with worry. "They are going to judge me," she said. "A woman alone with a baby living with a single man." "Let them judge," Jake said firmly. "You have done nothing wrong and neither have I. Hold your head up." But when the Parkers arrived, they were surprisingly kind. Mrs. Parker brought a basket of food and some baby clothes her grandchildren had outgrown, and the Reverend spoke gently with Penelope about her situation. By the time they left an hour later, Penelope was smiling, and Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The town's moral authorities had given their implicit approval to the arrangement, which would go a long way toward preventing gossip. As March turned to April and then May, the Kansas prairie bloomed with wildflowers, and something else began to bloom as well. Jake found himself looking forward to mealtimes not just for the excellent food Penelope prepared but for her company. He liked the sound of her voice, the way she hummed while she worked, the way she cared for Rosemary with such gentle devotion. He liked coming home to a house that smelled of fresh bread and had flowers on the table. He liked not being alone. And he was starting to realize he more than liked Penelope Lane. It happened slowly, without him quite noticing until it was too late. The way his heart lifted when he saw her hanging laundry in the morning sun, her dark hair caught back in a simple braid. The way he found excuses to be near her, to brush past her in the kitchen or sit close by while she mended his shirts. The way he could not stop thinking about the curve of her smile or the sound of her laughter. He was falling in love with her, and it terrified him. Because Penelope was still a married woman, even if her husband was a brute who did not deserve her. And more than that, she had been through trauma and hardship. She was just starting to feel safe again. The last thing she needed was Jake complicating things with his feelings. So he kept quiet and tried to act normal, even as his heart grew fuller every day. Penelope, for her part, was experiencing her own confusion. She had been so focused on survival for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to simply live. To wake up without fear, to go to bed with a full stomach, to watch her daughter grow stronger and healthier each day. The ranch had become a sanctuary, and Jake had become something she had not expected, a friend, a protector, and maybe, just maybe, something more. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, that any feelings beyond that were inappropriate and impossible. But her heart did not listen to reason. It noticed the way Jake's eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness in his strong hands when he held Rosemary, the sound of his voice reading aloud from the newspaper after supper. It noticed how safe she felt with him, how right it felt to be here in this house, living this life. but she was married to Thomas, and even if she never saw him again, she was not free. The law did not care that he had hurt her, that she had fled for her life. In the eyes of society, she was still his wife, and any feelings she had for Jake were wrong. It was a beautiful evening in mid-May when everything changed. Jake had been out mending fences all day, and he came in hot and tired, his shirt sticking to his back with sweat. Penelope had supper ready, a simple meal of fried chicken and potatoes, and she poured him a glass of cool water from the well. "You work too hard," she said, and there was something in her voice that made Jake look up. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and suddenly the air felt different, charged with something electric. Penelope's breath caught, and Jake felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. "Penelope," he started, not sure what he was going to say. But before he could continue, they heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. Jake's hand went instinctively to the rifle hanging near the door, and Penelope's face went white with fear. "Stay inside," Jake commanded, and he stepped out onto the porch. A man was riding hard toward the house, and even in the fading light Jake could see he was angry. The stranger reined his horse to a stop and dismounted, and Jake immediately disliked everything about him. He was stocky and red-faced, with mean little eyes and hands that curled into fists. "Where is she?" the man demanded. "Where is my wife?" Jake's blood went cold. Thomas Lane had found them. "I do not know what you are talking about," Jake said evenly, blocking the door with his body. "Do not lie to me, boy. I tracked her all the way from Missouri." "Woman in the general store said Jake Yates had a house guest, a woman with a baby. That is my wife and my child, and I am taking them home." Behind Jake, he heard Penelope gasp, and Thomas's eyes lit up with cruel triumph. "There you are, Penny. Get your things. We are leaving." "No." Penelope's voice was shaky but firm as she appeared in the doorway, holding Rosemary. "I am not going anywhere with you, Thomas." Thomas's face darkened with rage. "You are my wife. You belong to me." "I belong to no one," Penelope said, her voice growing stronger. "You hurt me. You frightened me. You made me fear for my daughter's life. I will never go back to that." Thomas took a step forward, and Jake moved to intercept him. "The lady said no. I think it is time for you to leave." "This is none of your business, Cowboy. She is my wife under the law." "And she is under my protection," Jake said quietly. "So I am making it my business. You can ride away now, or I can make you leave. Your choice." For a moment it looked like Thomas might try to fight. His hands clenched and unclenched, and his breathing came hard and fast. But Jake was taller, younger, and he had the rifle, and eventually Thomas's survival instinct won out over his anger. "This is not over," Thomas snarled. "She is my wife. I have rights." "Your rights ended when you raised your hand to her," Jake said coldly. "Now get off my property." Thomas mounted his horse, but before he rode off, he looked at Penelope with such hatred that Jake felt her flinch behind him. "You will regret this, Penny. Both of you will." Then he was gone, galloping back toward town in a cloud of dust. Jake waited until he was sure Thomas was truly gone before he turned to Penelope. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand, and tears streamed down her face. Without thinking, Jake took Rosemary from her arms and set the baby in her cradle, then pulled Penelope into his arms. She collapsed against him, sobbing, and Jake held her tight, one hand stroking her hair. "You are safe," he murmured. "I will not let him take you, I promise." "He found me," Penelope choked out. "He actually came all this way. What if he comes back? Then I will be ready." "But Penelope, you need to listen to me. He threatened you. He threatened me. We need to go to the sheriff and tell him what happened. We need to make this official." Penelope pulled back to look at him, her eyes wide and frightened. "The sheriff will make me go back to him." "The law says a wife must obey her husband." Not if that husband is violent. I know Sheriff Coleman. He is a good man. He will help us." Jake cupped her face gently, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "Trust me, please." After a long moment, Penelope nodded. The next morning, they rode into Hayes City together, Penelope holding Rosemary and sitting in front of Jake on his horse. Jake had not wanted to leave her alone at the ranch, and she had clung to him the whole ride, still terrified that Thomas would appear again. Sheriff Coleman listened to their story with a grave expression, his mustache twitching as Penelope described the abuse she had suffered. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Madam, I believe every word you have said. And if it were up to me, I would tell that husband of yours to get lost and never come back. But the law is the law. You are married to him, and unless you can get a divorce, you are bound to him." "What about divorce?" Jake asked. "What does she need to do?" "Well, she would need grounds. Abuse is grounds in Kansas, but she would need proof, witnesses, documentation." "I have scars," Penelope said quietly. "Doc Morrison saw them when he examined me." "That is a start. If the doc is willing to testify and if you can find a lawyer to take your case, you might have a chance. But I will warn you, it will not be easy and it will not be quick. These things can take months, even years." Jake felt frustration building in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "In the meantime, what can we do about Thomas Lane? He made threats. He tried to force Penelope to leave with him. I can have a talk with him, make it clear he is not welcome to harass you folks. But beyond that, my hands are tied. If he causes real trouble, you come get me and I will deal with it. But Jake, you be careful. Men like that, when they feel like they are losing control, they can be dangerous." As they left the sheriff's office, Jake made another decision. They walked down the street to the office of Samuel Brennan, the only lawyer in Hayes City. Brennan was a balding man in his 40s with sharp eyes and a reputation for being fair, if expensive. When Jake explained what they needed, Brennan listened carefully, asked Penelope several questions about her marriage and the abuse, and then sat back with a thoughtful expression. "I will take your case, Mrs. Lane. I think we have a solid argument for divorce based on cruelty. However, I must be honest with you about the costs. My fee is $50 plus court costs." Penelope's face fell. "I do not have that kind of money." "I will pay it," Jake said immediately. "Jake, no, you have already done so much. I said I will pay it, and I will. Mr. Brennan, draw up whatever papers you need. We want this done as quickly as possible." Brennan nodded. "I will need some time to prepare the case. In the meantime, Mrs. Lane, I need you to write down everything you remember about the abuse. Dates, times, what happened. The more detail, the better. And I will speak with Doc Morrison about his medical observations." As they rode back to the ranch, Penelope was quiet, lost in thought. Jake did not push her to talk, just kept the horse at a steady pace and tried to project calm he did not entirely feel. $50 was a significant sum, nearly all his savings, but he did not regret it for a moment. If it meant Penelope could be free of Thomas, it was worth every penny. That night, after supper, Penelope sat at the table with pen and paper, writing out her testimony. Jake tended to Rosemary, rocking the baby gently while Penelope worked. He watched the emotions play across her face as she remembered and recorded each incident, and his hatred for Thomas Lane grew with every passing minute. When she finally set down the pen, her hands were shaking. "It is done. 5 pages. 5 pages of my shame and my failure." Jake set Rosemary in her cradle and moved to sit beside Penelope. "It is not shame and it is not failure. You survived. You protected your daughter. You were strong enough to leave. That is not weakness, Penelope. That is courage." She looked at him with tears in her eyes. "You keep saying things like that. You keep treating me like I matter. Why? Because you do matter." The words came out more intense than Jake intended, and he saw Penelope's eyes widen. "You and Rosemary both. You matter to me." "Jake," she whispered, and there was something in the way she said his name that made his heart race. He knew he should stop, should pull back, but he could not. "I know the timing is terrible. I know you have been through hell, and the last thing you need is me making things complicated. But Penelope, I need you to know that you are not just a house guest or an employee to me. You are not just someone I am helping. You are more than that. You have become so much more." "What are you saying?" Her voice was barely audible. "I am saying that I care about you, deeply. I am saying that when I think about the future, I cannot imagine it without you in it. I am saying that I am falling in love with you and I do not know how to stop." Penelope's breath caught, and for a moment she just stared at him. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. "Jake, I am still married. Even if we are divorcing, even if I never see Thomas again, the law says I am not free, I know. And I have so much baggage, a failed marriage, a baby, trauma I am still working through. I would not blame you if you changed your mind. Penelope, look at me." Jake waited until her eyes met his. "None of that changes how I feel, none of it. I love you, not despite your past, but including it. Your past made you who you are, and who you are is someone worth loving." A tear slid down her cheek. "I never thought I would feel safe with a man again. I never thought I could trust someone enough to let them close. But you, Jake, you have been so patient and so kind. You have given me a home and a future. You have made me feel human again. Does that mean you might feel the same way?" Jake hardly dared to hope. Penelope's smile was tremulous but real. "It means I already do. I think I have been falling in love with you since the morning you made me breakfast and did not ask for anything in return. I was just too scared to admit it." Jake felt like his heart might burst from his chest. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, a promise more than a passion, and when they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "We will take this slow," Jake said. "We will wait until the divorce is final and you are truly free. And then, if you still want me, I will marry you proper. I will adopt Rosemary and give her my name. We will build a life together, the three of us." "Yes," Penelope whispered. "Yes to all of it." The next few months were challenging. Thomas tried twice more to approach the ranch, and both times Jake ran him off. After the second incident, Sheriff Coleman arrested Thomas for trespassing and disturbing the peace, and he spent 3 days in jail. When he was released, he finally seemed to get the message that he was not welcome, and he left Hays City. But the lawyer warned them that Thomas's absence did not mean he had given up. He could still contest the divorce, could drag things out in court. They needed to be prepared for a long battle. Through it all, Jake and Penelope's love continued to grow. They were careful to maintain propriety, conscious of how things looked, but their feelings for each other were no secret. Mrs. Parker and the other church ladies became regular visitors, offering support and companionship to Penelope. The community, it seemed, had decided that the young woman who had fled an abusive husband deserved a second chance at happiness. Summer came to the Kansas plains in all its golden glory. The ranch prospered, with good rainfall and healthy cattle. Rosemary grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, laughing baby who adored Jake and reached for him whenever he came into view. Penelope bloomed too, putting on weight, gaining color in her cheeks, losing the haunted look that had been in her eyes when she first arrived. In July, Mr. Brennan came to the ranch with news. Thomas had finally signed the divorce papers. He had not contested it, had not asked for custody of Rosemary, had simply signed and left. The divorce would be final in 30 days. "He is gone?" Penelope asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Really gone. According to the postmark, he mailed these from St. Louis. He seems to have moved on. "You are free, Mrs. Lane, or you will be in 30 days." After the lawyer left, Penelope and Jake stood on the porch, watching the sun set over the prairie. Rosemary was asleep inside, and for once they had a moment of peace. "It is really over," Penelope said wonderingly. "He cannot hurt me anymore. The law cannot force me back to him. I am free." Jake took her hand. "What do you want to do with your freedom?" She turned to him with a smile. "I want to marry you. I want to build a life here with you and Rosemary. I want to have more children and grow old together. I want all the things I thought I would never have." "Then that is what we will do." Jake pulled her close and kissed her, right there on the porch in full view of anyone who might happen by. "As soon as those 30 days are up, we are going to see Reverend Parker." The wedding took place on a beautiful August morning with half of Hayes City in attendance. Penelope wore a new dress of pale blue cotton that Mrs. Parker and the church ladies had helped her sew, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Jake had picked that morning. Rosemary, now 6 months old and sitting up on her own, was held by Mrs. Parker during the ceremony, gurgling happily. Reverend Parker performed the service in the small church, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Jake kissed Penelope with such joy that the congregation burst into applause. It was a new beginning, a fresh start, a second chance at happiness that neither of them had thought possible just 6 months earlier. The reception was held at the church hall, with food and music and dancing. Jake was not much of a dancer, but he held Penelope close and swayed to the music, and nothing had ever felt more right. Doc Morrison toasted to their health, Sheriff Coleman congratulated them gruffly, and Mr. Brennan smiled with the satisfaction of a lawyer who had won a difficult case. As the sun began to set and people started heading home, Jake and Penelope took Rosemary and rode back to the ranch. Their ranch now, legally and officially. Penelope Yates, no longer Penelope Lane, a new name for a new life. That first night as husband and wife, after Rosemary was asleep, they sat together on the porch and talked about the future. They spoke of expanding the herd, of building a bigger house, of the children they hoped to have. They spoke of the hard work ahead, of the challenges they would face, but also of the joy they had found in each other. "I never thought I could be this happy," Penelope said softly. "After Thomas, after everything, I thought happiness was just not meant for me, but you proved me wrong." "We proved each other wrong," Jake said. "I thought I was meant to live my life alone on this ranch. I had convinced myself I was fine with it. Then you showed up in my hayloft and changed everything." "Best trespassing I ever did," Penelope said with a smile. Jake laughed and pulled her close. "Best trespassing I ever discovered." The years that followed were good ones. The ranch continued to prosper, and so did the Yates family. Rosemary grew into a bright, curious little girl who followed Jake everywhere and learned to ride a horse before she was 3 years old. She called him Papa, the only father she had ever known, and Jake had legally adopted her within a year of marrying Penelope. 2 years after their wedding, Penelope gave birth to a son they named Joshua, a healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's smile. 15 months later came another daughter, Margaret, who had dark hair like her mother and a fierce determination that promised she would be a force to be reckoned with. The small ranch house became too cramped for their growing family, so Jake and Penelope spent a summer building an addition, with help from neighbors and friends. Now there were proper bedrooms for the children, a larger kitchen, and a sitting room where they could all gather in the evenings. Penelope had never been happier. She had found her calling in motherhood and in helping Jake run the ranch. She kept a large vegetable garden, preserved food for the winter, and even started raising chickens. She made friends in town, joined the church ladies' auxiliary, and became a respected member of the community. The frightened, desperate woman who had arrived in the middle of the night was gone, replaced by someone strong and confident and loved. Jake looked at his wife across the dinner table one evening, watching her laugh at something Rosemary had said, and marveled at how far they had come. 5 years ago, he had been alone, resigned to a solitary life. Now his home was full of noise and laughter and love, and he could not imagine it any other way. "What are you thinking about?" Penelope asked, catching him staring. "Just how lucky I am," Jake said simply. "We both are," Penelope replied, reaching across the table to take his hand. "We both are." They never heard from Thomas again. Penelope had worried in the early years that he might reappear, might try to cause trouble, but as time passed and there was no sign of him, those fears faded. She was free of him in every way that mattered, and her life had moved on to something infinitely better. One spring morning, when Rosemary was 7 and the younger children were playing in the yard, Jake found Penelope standing in the barn, looking up at the hayloft. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Just remembering," Penelope said softly. "I was thinking about the night I climbed up there, so desperate and scared, with no idea what would happen next. If someone had told me then that 5 years later I would be standing here as your wife, the mother of your children, living a life I love, I would never have believed them." "I am glad you picked my barn to sleep in," Jake said. Penelope turned in his arms to face him, smiling. "I am glad you did not shoot me for trespassing." "Best decision I ever made," Jake said, and kissed her. As they stood there in the barn, sunlight streaming through the gaps in the walls, with the sound of their children's laughter floating in from outside, they both knew they had found something rare and precious. Love, yes, but also redemption. Second chances. The opportunity to build something good from the ruins of pain and loss. The Wild West was not an easy place to live. It was harsh and unforgiving, full of danger and uncertainty. But it was also a place where people could reinvent themselves, where the past did not have to define the future, where a desperate woman and a lonely cowboy could find each other in the middle of the night and build a life together. Years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and celebrations. Rosemary grew into a beautiful young woman who was as skilled with horses as her father, who could outshoot most of the young men in Hayes City, and who had her mother's kind heart. Joshua became a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning, reminding Penelope of her own father. Margaret was the wild child, always getting into scrapes and adventures, keeping her parents on their toes. When Rosemary was 16, a young man named Daniel Foster began courting her, with Jake's grudging permission. He was a good kid, the son of a neighboring rancher, and he clearly adored Rosemary. Jake found himself in the strange position of being the protective father, remembering with some irony how he had once been the young man asking permission to court a girl. "You are being too hard on him," Penelope said one night after Jake had grilled poor Daniel about his intentions and future prospects. "I just want to make sure he is worthy of her," Jake protested. "You do realize that to the rest of the world, she is Thomas Lane's biological daughter. You are the one who made her yours through love and choice. You have no room to talk about worthiness." Jake pulled Penelope into his arms. "Point taken. I will try to be nicer to the boy. Thank you, and Jake." Penelope looked up at him with that smile that still made his heart race after all these years. "You were always worthy. Never doubt that." 2 years later, they held a wedding at the ranch for Rosemary and Daniel. It was a bittersweet day for Jake, giving away his oldest daughter, but he could see the happiness in her eyes and knew she had chosen well. Penelope cried happy tears, remembering her own second chance wedding in the little church, and feeling grateful that her daughter's first wedding was everything a wedding should be, joyful and full of hope. Joshua decided he wanted to go to college back east to study law. It was an expensive proposition, but Jake and Penelope had saved carefully over the years, and they were able to make it happen. The day they put him on the train was hard, the first time any of their children had left Kansas, but they were proud of him and his ambitions. Margaret, true to form, announced at 15 that she had no intention of ever getting married, that she was going to run the ranch herself someday and did not need a husband to do it. Jake and Penelope exchanged amused glances, figuring she would probably change her mind eventually, but supporting her independent spirit in the meantime. As Jake approached 50 and Penelope her mid-40s, they found themselves in a new phase of life. The ranch was well established and successful. Their children were grown or nearly so. They had time now to simply enjoy each other's company, to take long rides across the prairie, to sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the sunset. "You ever regret it?" Penelope asked one evening. "Taking in a stranger and her baby, taking on all the trouble that came with us." "Not for one single second," Jake said firmly. "You and Rosemary and then Joshua and Margaret, you are the best things that ever happened to me. I was just existing before you came. You taught me how to live." "You saved my life," Penelope said. "Literally and figuratively, I was broken and you helped me heal. You gave me a reason to hope again." "We saved each other," Jake said, pulling her close. "That is how love works." More years passed. Rosemary and Daniel had their first child, a boy they named after Jake. Joshua graduated from law school and opened a practice in Topeka, though he came home to visit as often as he could. Margaret, contrary to her teenage declarations, fell head over heels for a cowboy named Sam and married him in a quiet ceremony at the ranch. She did indeed help run the ranch, though, with Sam working alongside Jake, while Margaret managed the books and the business side of things. Jake's hair turned gray and Penelope's dark locks gained silver streaks. They moved a little slower, felt the cold winters more keenly, but they were healthy and happy, surrounded by family and friends. They had built something lasting, something good, something worth every challenge they had faced along the way. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were now 6 grandchildren running around, filling the house with noise and chaos. Rosemary stood with her 3 children, Daniel beside her. Joshua had brought his wife and 2 children from Topeka. Margaret and Sam had a baby daughter, just 6 months old. As Jake looked around at his family, at the legacy he and Penelope had built together, he felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what mattered. Not money or success or reputation, but love and family and the connections between people. That evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, Jake and Penelope walked out to the barn together, something they did occasionally when they wanted to remember. They climbed the ladder to the hayloft, moving carefully with their older bodies, and sat in the spot where Penelope had slept that desperate night 32 years ago. "Hard to believe it all started here," Penelope said, looking around at the space that had once been her sanctuary and prison both. "I told you that first day that you could stay as long as forever," Jake said. "I am glad you took me up on it." "Forever is not long enough," Penelope said, leaning against his shoulder. "I want more than forever with you. Then we will figure out a way to make it happen. Maybe in whatever comes after this life, we will find each other again." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the night, the horses moving in their stalls below, the wind rustling through the prairie grass. They had lived a good life together, a full life, and they were not done yet. There were still grandchildren to spoil, still sunsets to watch, still moments of joy to be found in the everyday. As they climbed down from the hayloft and walked hand in hand back to the house, both of them felt grateful. Grateful for chance and choice, for courage and compassion, for the random moment that had brought them together and the deliberate love that had kept them together. The house was dark and quiet when they entered, everyone asleep. Jake and Penelope checked on their visiting grandchildren, pausing at each door to peek in at the sleeping children. Then they retired to their own room, the same room where Penelope had spent her first night at the ranch all those years ago. As they lay in bed, Penelope curled against Jake's chest, his arms around her. They both felt the deep contentment of a life well lived. Tomorrow there would be more work to do, more family to tend to, more life to live. But tonight they had this moment of perfect peace. "I love you," Penelope whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Jake replied, kissing the top of her head. "Always have, always will." And as they drifted off to sleep, they both knew they had found what everyone searches for, a love that transforms, that heals, that lasts. From a desperate night in a hayloft to a lifetime of happiness, they had traveled far together. And they would continue traveling together for whatever time they had left, partners and lovers and best friends, until the very end. The ranch would pass down through their children and grandchildren, a legacy of hard work and love. The story of how Jake found Penelope in his hayloft would become family legend, told to each new generation as an example of how kindness and compassion can change lives, how love can bloom in the most unexpected places, how second chances are real if you are brave enough to take them. Years later, when both Jake and Penelope had passed on peacefully in their 80s, their children would gather at the ranch for the funeral. And Rosemary, now a grandmother herself, would stand in the barn and tell her grandchildren about the night her mother climbed into this hayloft, desperate and afraid, and found the man who would change everything. "Your great-grandfather did not have to help us," Rosemary would say, her voice thick with emotion. "He could have turned us away, but he chose kindness instead. He chose love, and that choice created all of this, all of us. Every person in this family exists because one cowboy decided to help a stranger in need." The grandchildren would listen wide-eyed, trying to imagine the grandmother they knew as a baby in that desperate woman's arms, trying to picture their strong, capable great-grandfather as a young man opening his home to strangers. "The lesson here," Rosemary would continue, "is that you never know when one act of kindness might change everything. You never know when the person you help might become the person who matters most. Your great-grandparents taught us that love is not just a feeling. It is a choice you make every single day." And so the legacy would continue, generation after generation, a testimony to the power of compassion and the enduring strength of love born from the most unlikely circumstances. But on that 30th anniversary night, Jake and Penelope knew none of what was to come. They only knew the present, the warmth of each other's presence, the satisfaction of a life lived together. They had started with nothing but hope and fear, and they had built something beautiful. They had taken a desperate night in a hayloft and transformed it into a lifetime of love. As dawn broke over the Kansas prairie the next morning, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Jake woke first as he always did. He looked at Penelope sleeping beside him, her face peaceful in the early light, and felt the same surge of love he had felt that first night when he had looked at her in the hayloft and decided to help. Best decision he had ever made. Penelope stirred and opened her eyes, smiling when she saw him watching her. "Good morning," she murmured. "Good morning, my love," Jake replied. And as they rose to face another day together, surrounded by their family, on the land they had built their life upon, they both knew they had found their happy ending. Not perfect, because life is never perfect, but real and true and lasting. From a desperate woman seeking shelter to a beloved wife and mother. From a lonely cowboy resigned to solitude to a husband and father surrounded by love. The journey had been long and sometimes difficult, but every step had been worth it. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the ranch came alive with the sounds of family. Children laughing, adults talking, the everyday business of life unfolding. Jake and Penelope emerged from their room to join the celebration of another day, another blessing, another moment in the life they had created together. 32 years after Penelope had climbed into Jake's hayloft with baby Rosemary in her arms, she stood in her kitchen making breakfast for her family, and she knew without a doubt that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The scared, desperate girl she had once been was still a part of her, but she had grown into so much more. She had healed, had thrived, had loved and been loved in return. Jake came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against him, comfortable and content. Their children and grandchildren filled the house with noise and life, and outside the Kansas prairie stretched to the horizon, golden and endless under the summer sun. This was home. This was family. This was love. And it had all started with a cowboy who had found a woman sleeping in his hayloft with a baby, and instead of turning them away, had said the words that would change all their lives forever. Stay as long as forever. She had stayed, and forever had turned out to be exactly long enough.